continue that thought that, like, it's not our fault we've been living high on the hog. And
yeah, I mean, I always like to try and put things in a good picture, and like, I like big picture thinking. I'm very,
Mhm.
how does it all connect, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be doing the show that I do or enjoying the series or intellectual pursuits. But like the thing I keep returning to a lot as I'm really as I've really lost the last vestiges of ideology, which makes it a lot tougher to write, by the way, because when you
Mhm.
and to try and like put your ideas out there, because the ideology is kind of the vessel that you can use to help formulate your thoughts, and rightly so. But it's just like, it's not our fault that we're the ones in 2022 that have gotten to live, that we're at the end of people living high on the hog from like
Yeah.
technological accidents. Well, technological accidents, but that were then purposefully exploited vis-a-vis like the current monetary system that we live under, that's borrowed from the future for so long, but because, again, because of the largesse, you can criticize it a bit if you want, but because of the largesse, because of the base level of what we consider to be like wealth or standard of living, again, specifically those of us in the United States, right, in the weird countries, as some people would put it, is precisely just that, like, it's, again, we're not to blame for the fact that all these people have been borrowing a ton of money before we got here, and that, now we have to be the ones that look and say, oh, everything that you said was wrong. And in
Mhm.
fact, the other thing I think I said it right before we went live is just how, looking back, is like, oh, so the popes interestingly enough, the popes actually address a lot of this stuff. I would also just, I love drawing the point of between, you have this knowledge that is kind of given. And in fact, I think you could say that science has caught up to it in many
Mhm.
respects, what we understand about evolutionary biology and how ecosystems
Mhm.
develop, and how, species live in, like what an actual ecosystem is, and how it actually, it's not always pretty, right? You have the quintessential case of reintroducing
Yeah.
wolves, and that helping the buffalo
Mhm.
population, right? There's nothing pretty about watching a pack of wolves take down a buffalo, but it turns out in the long run, it actually creates a better ecosystem. Thankfully speaking, our ecosystem as humans doesn't have to be as violent, but the point being is that there is an ecosystem, and in an ecosystem, people have different roles, right? There is a division of labor. So yeah, it's like, but that big picture thing of, it's not our fault that it's not our fault that we have so much in that respect. And that's not, I'm not trying to eschew responsibility. I'm trying to give people a little bit of license to understand why, why we need to break paradigms, so to speak, or why we need to re-examine what we think the ordering of society should look like. And yeah.
What strikes me is, like, the popes used to be based.
Yeah. Well, in
It's like,
modern parlance, certainly.
oh yeah, and like what you were talking about at the beginning with, like, all of the like the debt they've taken out. It's not just like monetary debt that they've like taken loans from and squandered. It's the social capital that they've taken and they've squandered as well. I
Yes.
mean, you've allowed generations of like no fault divorce, of easy access to porn, easy access to contraception, easy access to drugs, easy access to to cheap money. Basically, cheap money is, by the way, it's like the worst of the worst. And the and you add all of these up, and what do you get? You get a much lower. By the way, cheap welfare as well. That they
Yeah.
didn't earn, and when you add all of that up, you get a much lower trust society that is much harder to govern, and it's much more expensive to govern. And remember, like, our Constitution was created for a moral and just people. It is not created for I mean, it was created for Christians. It was not created for an unchristian society. So when you're, adding in all of these extra non-Christians, when you're, adding in all of this secularism, it's like you're doing something that is raising the cost of living for future generations in order to basically have money for your cheaper labor, cheaper goods and services and stuff here in the present, because all of the problems are going to come in the future. And it's in effect, they haven't just indebted their great grandchildren, they've destroyed their social trust as well that they would have. And so it's like they've stolen wealth from us in so many different ways. And this is not the necessary kind of equality. This is the unnecessary kind of inequality. We don't need this kind.
Yeah.
And let's go ahead and read the chapter. Welcome to Popular Liberty. It is June 3rd in the year 2022 of our Lord Jesus Christ, and we have chapter 6 of They Have Uncrowned Him, this a masterpiece of a Catholic social teaching written in the 20th century. And this time we're going to be talking about why inequality is necessary. And in the first like 5 chapters, we've gone through like the origins of liberalism, and what this heresy actually is, why it's wrong. And of course, LB and I have been commenting in on some of the economics and other parts of it as well, other ways it's just wrong. But but this time around, we're going to be like really hitting at the throat, as we've had a few chapters on why liberty is not really what they say it is, and why that doesn't quite work the way they said it does. And now we're going to hit at the second part of the revolution, of equality. Now we're going to hit the left. We had enough beating up on libertarians. We'll get to them a little bit again, but now we get to beat up on the left, my favorite subject.
Well, right. And this is, again, he's refined this, what many people would interpret as a broad idea of liberalism. And what he's done is he's helped refine the idea to understand what the poison root actually is. And it is this impulse towards perpetual revolution, or putting that another way, it is a liberalism without limit. So it is the idea that there not only that there aren't any distinctions, but that we're not allowed to draw distinctions, or we're not allowed to put a limit on thing, or we're not allowed to put a limit on things. We're not allowed to have responsibility, or not that we're not allowed to have it, but that you have no responsibility to the people in your life.
Basically,
right?
you can't judge. If your daughter wants to grow up to be a doctor or a prostitute, you need to look at those the same way. It's like, you can't judge. It's like, of course you can. That's just obviously wrong. And those are necessary. Those are unequal by nature, and they should be treated as such. And they say, these are not the same. And when you understand, like, this is the moral relativism, which we can still bash libertarians for this, by the way. Because moral relativism really is moral equality. That's what it is functionally. It says that it's because it's all relative, it's all equal. And there is no distinguishment between an act that has a good positive existence, and an act that has a negative existence. That does, it's like it has always negative effects on being every time. And there's no because there's no distinguishment from it, which is what nature has intended. Nature intends for us to make these sorts of distinctions, that one of these is the good thing that you should be doing. Liberty being the proper liberty, properly understood, is the freedom to choose the good, and to disadvantage the bad. Like, you don't want the bad. These are not equal. These are not the same. And again, it's like what the second part of the revolution that seeks to really just deny reality. This is a far worse denial of reality than just liberty. And there are just liberty as liberalism constructs it. This idea that we are all born equal is so much worse and so much more obviously wrong than the than its first tenet of liberty being the liberty to do whatever the heck I want, so long as I'm not hurting anybody else, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, which is one that prioritizes liberty of movement over, liberty of being or liberty of thought. I don't remember the exact formulation that the bishop uses off the top of my head, but one that comes from within your spiritual center, so to speak, versus just the physical, just versus what the modern hyper rationalist interpretation might be, which is to say one that's just concerned with where you are in the world, right, and where you can go, right? So
Mhm.
if somebody's got a fence up, well, that's an imposition against my liberty, because what if I want to walk through his nice yard and swim in his pool?
He
That's
does make that point.
right, and
The
and
private
that's
property is the worst,
yeah,
which is like
and
this is
that's
where
what
that
we're
comes from.
pushing. That's what you'll see is he's kind of is what he's pushing against, because we understand too that, again, there can be liberty without liberalism. And in
Yes.
fact, the idea of liberty is as old as Sumerian culture. So obviously it's something that humans have cared about. So can we still recover the idea of liberty whilst disposing of liberalism? Well, I think that's kind of where this book has been leading us.
And if you want a very special presentation on that, check out the end of the last episode of They Have Uncrowned Him, where I actually talk about the moral. I make the moral argument for private statecraft as a way of doing exactly that. And but let's go ahead and start this reading.
Did you want to tweet?
No. Oh, we're not live. No, we're not live.
Oh, we're not really live. Got it.
No. All right, go ahead.
Chapter 6, Necessary Inequalities. Nature goes forward with actions of authority and inequality, contradicting at a right angle the odd liberal and democratic hypothesis. Charles Morris. An individualism against nature. Let us carry on with the analysis of the principle of liberalism. It is contrary to nature, says Cardinal Billot, that in that it pretends that everything should give way to the good of individual liberty, that social necessities have multiplied the obstacles to this liberty, and that the ideal regime for man is that in which the law of pure and perfect individualism would reign. Now, the author adds, this individualism is absolutely contrary to human nature. You will have recognized the why can't I speak tonight? The individualistic liberalism of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which we find again at the bottom of all the present day political thought. According to Rousseau, men are born free, that is to say, subjected to no restraint by nature asocial, created to live alone in the jungle where they are happy. The origin of their misfortunes and of inequality resides in the introduction of private property, which engendered rivalries, a state of war of all against all.
Which
If
is so
men,
funny that like right there, because it's literally the opposite. It's the tragedy of the commons that leads to war. It's
well, right,
when something is like publicly owned and everyone treats it as a renter, and therefore wealth degrades over time and it becomes scarcer and scarcer and scarcer, and poverty then in turn, I should say that perception of poverty, is what in turn leads people to, to think, violence is okay because, somebody else has done something wrong. This is the tragedy of the commons. And it's funny because it's like private property is literally the thing that makes things way less scarce, but through competition forces and all of that. It's the this idea from Rousseau. He literally has it completely backwards to where 1 second. Let me actually here we go.
well,
He has it actually completely
and
backwards.
I think the bishop is also having showing a bit of his bias as a Frenchman. It just to make the point that it's not like Rousseau was the only person who had a theory of the formation of society. Of course, during this time, we see philosophers having many different theories. The main three being Rousseau. The main three, historically speaking, that we still teach today would be Rousseau, Locke, and Hobbes, right? To which Hobbes has the complete inverse, and then Locke kind of goes off and does his own sort of thing, right? Because he
I actually don't know Locke's. What is it? What's his?
For which part?
His theory of the origins of society.
Gosh, it's been so long. Hang on. So Locke talks a lot about how ideas built up onto each other. Well, his whole thing is it would
Like
end up being
basically.
homesteading.
Okay, so it's
Right.
basically the Hoppian version then.
Yeah, I would assume Hoppe would have borrowed a lot from Locke.
Okay,
but I'm trying to remember what his actual. Well, I think he actually grounds it in metaphysical, like in a metaphysical deity of some kind. That like ultimately the establishment of society was done on this like religious basis. but then that also occurred because of, again, like, but then, like, what do you do with new land? And that's where he derives homesteading from. So yeah, it's been a while though, so don't quote me.
All right,
but I'm pretty sure that's close to it. But the point being, Hobbes says that life is brutish and short, and it's the state, right, the Leviathan, that actually gives man freedom. Rousseau says that man is born free, society are his chains. And I think Hobbes is closer to it.
Hobbes is closer.
You don't like it when you're reading Hobbes as a 20-year-old, but as you get a little bit older, you're like, well, he's a lot closer to it, certainly closer to it than Rousseau. And in fact, personally, I could never stand Rousseau, but I just wanted to kind of point that out again as giving a little bit of a larger context of how people were discussing it. I think he does play some. Certainly, the worst elements can be found in Rousseau. I grant him that, but it's worth belaboring the point that other people that are still taught today have different conceptions.
He's by far the most egregious example.
Precisely, for reasons that we're about to get into.
Yep, go ahead.
If men group themselves then in society, it is in no way out of a necessity of their nature, but is by the sole discretion of their free will, as an emergency exit from that state where man is a wolf towards other men. Society has nothing natural. It is purely conventional in its historical origin and in its constitution. This convention is the social contract. This whole theory is refuted in advance, first by St. Thomas Aquinas, who demonstrates the social nature of man by bringing into evidence the fact that man is the animal most devoid of natural means of subsisting in an autonomous manner when he comes into the world, and this other fact, that men at the adult age cannot satisfy all their needs alone, therefore they have to help one another. I would like to have you read an admirable page from the contemporary political thinker Charles Morris, 1868 to 1952, who, following St. Thomas, authoritatively sweeps away the Rousseauist, individualist, and egalitarian mythology. It is entitled Protective Inequality.
Go ahead, stop right there. Mm-hmm. I want to look at that, this idea that society is purely conventional. This is something that is, even though it's funny because, like, Liberté, I said we weren't going to bash libertarians all that much, but we're going to do it right now. Today really is more about the left, but libertarians still need to get their daily spanking. And like this right here, that society has nothing natural, is purely conventional. This is an idea that is carried forward on the right in general, because the right is a lot more where you see a lot of this kind of thinking, that it is a social contract, so to speak, and that it is something that we have made up. And that this is something you do see, like in the far right of libertarianism, society really should be all contract nature, and but it should be an explicit contract, and which is at least better, because a social contract, you can just make up whatever you want. And of course, and with the left, I mean, God only knows where that social contract is going to lead. And it's like, you're a bigot if you won't admit the man in the dress is a woman. And anyway, but this idea right here that you can just make up reality, because that's effectively what you're doing, is that because this is all social convention, it can be any way we want and it doesn't matter. Well, and that's completely wrong.
And you see how this leads very well into logical and legal positivism, which came about at the dawn of the century. And you can also see how in our internet age of information, how this is turned into basically, well, if I can make something that approaches a rational case for what I think I am as a person, and that can up to and include being an animal that is not a human, right? I found out in rural Nebraska they have kitty litter and they let kids eat off the floor in public high school. Heard this through the grapevine, that's happening. So that we're at to that point, whereas if somebody makes the case that they are something, you have to accept it. So again, you can see where I think he very neatly lays out how the trick is played, so to speak.
Yeah, and I like how he puts it too, because I'm going to start. I've started to put it this way in my own arguments lately. Go ahead. It will be
It is
sufficient.
entitled Protective Inequality. It will be sufficient for me here to deliver to you what Leo XIII teaches on this subject in his encyclical on the origin of political power. The important error of these philosophers consists in not seeing what is nevertheless obvious. It is that men do not constitute an uncivilized and solitary race. It is that before any resolution of their will, their natural condition is to live in society. And if you want to put yourself in the presence of mind of people in like this during the scientific revolution and kind of moving into modernism, or really the way that a lot of people will talk, like if you go through university and stuff, it's like, all right, so class, we're going to have a discussion about the origins of society, and somebody will say, well, God ordained it, right? Or give a religious thing. It's like, well, we're not going to talk about that. It's like, but seriously, right? It's basically saying like, well, we're going to pretend that all this stuff doesn't exist. We're going to start from scratch, and we're going to see where we go. We're going to forget everything about the past, and we're just going to focus on what we can what we think, how we think things actually are.
Yeah, let's, you have to make a first principles case. And you're like, oh, a first principle? You mean like in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God, the actual first principle?
Well, and of course,
and they're like, no, not that one. No, that one doesn't count. No.
Well, and at least a Descartes and a Rousseau attempted that in many respects, right? But then but just to the point of, especially as we move closer to the modernist age and we look back, like turn of the 20th century and certainly into the 21st century. Actually, turn of the 21st century, I think it would be characterized by something different. I think it would be characterized by inversion. But the turn of the 20th century is characterized by this positivist mindset, which is to say the pure expression, the pure existentialist expression of human will. If I can conceive of it, it can be true. Or and then transmuting that into it is true because I have said it is so.
And I can just wave this magic wand of force and make it so.
Right. Well, and that's what would happen. That's what happened like at the top.
Yep.
Right.
This is what happens with liberalism. Yep.
Because you're separating yourself out.
Well, you've made the interior objective and the exterior subjective, and you are using force to make the exterior conform to the interior, to make the subjective conform to the objective. Like, no, that is just not the case. And you see this is exactly where that leads.
A visionary equality. The egalitarian principle is visionary, Cardinal Billot says, in the first place because it does not agree in any way with reality. It supposes at the origin of all society an initial pact. Where did one see this? It supposes the free entry of each one into society. That is even stronger. It assumes that all men are tailored on exactly the same model, are exactly equal, which is the abstract man, millions of time reproduced without features of individuality. Where is he? Apply the social contract if it seems good to you, says Taine, but do not explain it except to the men for whom it has been fabricated. They are abstract men who are not of any century or of any country, pure entities hatched under the wand of metaphysics. Leo XIII expresses the same judgment in a few concise words, which follows the sentence quoted above. Add to that the pact in which they take pride is an invention and an idle fancy. I insist on the fancifulness of this equality, according to which men are born equal, or at least equal in rights. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights, proclaims the first article of the Declaration of the Rights of Man of the Citizen of 1791. Let us look at what the popes have thought of this. Pope Pius VI, first of all, condemning especially Article 2 of this same declaration, goes from that to the principle itself of liberty equality. He condemns it by calling it idle fancies and words devoid of meaning.
I want to just mention, like, right here, like he's already debunked it at the outset. It's like, you didn't choose to be born. Like that. I mean, that's his point right there, is that, you're presupposing that you entered society freely, that you made a choice to do that. No, you didn't. Like you were born a baby. you had no choice in this matter at all. It's like someone had to wipe your butt for like 2 or 3 years, which I am not looking forward to, and starting in like 3 weeks. And but yeah, it's like, no, you didn't. Like, you didn't even choose to wipe your butt. It's how did you choose to be coming here free and equal? Not only are you not equal, it's like much less to your parents who make all of the decisions for you. It's like you're not, like, even your parents are not equal to their superiors. Like, in what way are you possibly equal coming into this world? What way are you possibly free coming into this world? So it's like, at the outset, you would have to say that you being born was like a violation of your rights. Like, because that's exactly that is exactly what that entails right there. And when it's just it's liberalism takes these things to the absurd right
Well,
off the bat.
that's what the pro-abortion argument is.
Mhm.
In almost any case, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
push people past the talking points, you invariably end up at a point where you basically get to a point where they admit that they don't want to be alive, or that they
Yeah,
wish
pretty
they
much.
hadn't been born, and they don't want that for a future generation as a consequence. It's very, very
Yeah.
sad.
Well, yeah.
Like truly heartbreaking.
Yeah, you see,
Of where
that's
that
where it
actually
comes from.
comes,
That's
where that actually comes from psychologically.
because I was going to make that point earlier about like Rousseau. Like, who in the world thinks this way? What kind of fucked up person? Excuse my French. What kind of person thinks this way? And someone who's got something very, very wrong upstairs. And I think you just connected that to abortionists, that a lot of these people don't wish they weren't born.
Well, and that's because they were abused or abandoned or neglected, or
the natural order didn't serve them. They never got to experience the natural order the way God intended it to be, the way that way actual liberty is supposed to be. Liberty is the freedom to choose the good, and if all you're ever given is bad options, why would you care? And it's like, and if all options you've ever had are equally bad options, it's like, well, why is that any more valuable? It's not.
Yeah, I want to also just touch upon this words devoid of meaning, which is something I love. I like you might have seen me use it or said, and like you said, you're using my formulation is you're using words to say nothing.
Yeah.
And when you start to pay attention, you notice that people do this a lot. I do this a lot. You do this a lot. It's, a lot. Sometimes you're using filler words until you get to the point that you want to be making. It's kind of just a natural part of it's a natural part of how we communicate, but it especially comes out in rhetoric, because people will just speak in terms of platitudes and emotional manipulation, and that's using words to say nothing, right? Or you're just marginally clever, and so you figured out a long time ago you can turn things on a head, and unless you're up against somebody who's just as smart of you, if not smarter, that you can turn things on their head, and most people will be like, oh my gosh, this person is so smart. It's like, no, you're just being clever. You're not necessarily accomplishing anything profound. You're just using your words to say something, and that doesn't mean you're saying anything of significance.
Exactly.
This is why you don't get into needless arguments on Twitter, people.
God, I know.
Unless you're monetizing it.
I know.
So quoting from Pope Pius VI here, where is then this liberty of thought and action that the National Assembly grants to social man as an indefeasible right of nature? Is not this visionary right contrary to the rights of the Supreme Creator, to whom we owe our existence and all that we possess? Furthermore, can it be ignored that man has not been created for himself alone, but in order to be useful to his fellow creatures? For such is the weakness of human nature that, to preserve themselves, men need the mutual help of one such as... Whoops. Man, the text gets so much smaller in these sections. For such is the weakness of human nature that, to preserve themselves, men need the mutual help of one another. And that is why men have received from God reason and the use of words, to put them into a state of claiming the assistance of other people and of helping in their turn those who implore their support. It is therefore nature itself that has brought men together and has gathered them in society. Moreover, since the use that man must make of his reason consists essentially in recognizing his sovereign progenitor, in honoring him, in admiring him, in yielding to him all of his person and all of his being, since from his childhood he has to be subject to those who have superiority of age over him, to let himself be governed and instructed in lessons, to learn from them to regulate his life according to the laws of reason, of society, and of religion. Therefore, this equality, this liberty, that are so vaunted for him from the moment of his birth, only vain fancies and words empty of meaning.
Stop right there, because like this right here is one of the most profound points, and it skipped over my head like the first 3 times I read it. He's like that because I've made this point a few times that is it not this visionary right contrary to the rights of the supreme creator to whom we owe our existence and all that we possess. So in other words, right there, that's the source of rights. That's the only possible source of rights, because think about it like this: when you have a when you're presupposing naturalism, basically that there is no God and that all we see is all that there is. When you're presupposing that, you're presupposing that there is no such thing as objective morality, because where would such a justification come from? And when libertarians kind of make this Hoppian argumentation ethics argument about, you can't argue against against private property or against self-ownership, because self-ownership presupposes, or basically an argument itself presupposes that you own yourself, basically. And well, no, if we're presupposing naturalism, it would only presuppose that I possess myself, which is true. You always possess yourself. Morality is an extra component added on that makes possession ownership. And so if you are presupposing naturalism, you cannot believe in private property. You would have to conclude the commies are correct. That there's no such thing as private property. That is the real invention. This is where the commies are right, or at least they're right within their own, within their own presuppositions.
This is where the communism is another. It's another distillation of an idea. Right. So the idea starts all the way back in whatever year we're talking about with Rousseau. And it's pretty, it's not that bad. Right. Like this is how it always works. This is like this is why I think if you're somebody of the right, you instinctively have always kind of been like, why is slippery slope a fallacy? Because it seems to happen.
Yeah, it seems to work really,
right?
really well.
It seems to map out. It seems to map out in your day-to-day life. But that's I think something to it's consecutively, and as it's a refinement, right? It's a distillation or a reinterpretation relying on other principles. Some of those principles for Marx was a strict materialism, which comes from the naturalist idea, which is completely concerned with the self, and moreover locking people into these classes, right? Which is very akin to the social contract theory, broadly speaking, because you're a member of your class under the Marxist frame, whether you choose to or not, right? So if you're a member of the proletariat who becomes a capitalist, you have a false class consciousness, right? He would argue, like, literally because of your birth and upbringing, because of the difference of your mind, you actually have a false consciousness as a consequence, because there is nothing else but what you were born into.
Exactly. And it's a purely like consequentialist or naturalistic consequentialist way of looking at things, and it's actually very correct if those are your presuppositions. Whereas if you are like a conservative, American conservative, or like some sort of right wing or like a libertarian, and you're trying to presuppose that man himself is the beginning of rights, well, one, you're kind of like stealing natural law and appropriating it in a way that it doesn't work that way.
Well, and to be fair, I don't mind the people who are trying to sneak natural law into, you know what I mean? But I actually have noticed more and more now, but I've noticed more and more how much it does come back to that. Is basically it's like, okay, you're just you literally talk about the natural law, right? But you're not giving that metaphysical importance. You're
Yeah.
not giving that supreme important, right? The idea of a supreme
You're
being.
treating man as the first cause, basically.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
like we said, you need to talk about your first principles. I mean, society is not all convention. And, my first principles in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. You start there because that's the beginning of logic itself.
Mhm.
And so also the beginning of morality, because if you're atheist, you have no way of justifying the existence of morality. And therefore the commies are right. If there is no God, there is no real morality, and there's also no real property. And
Mhm.
because property requires ownership requires an objective morality requires the existence of a moral God. And that, if that doesn't exist, then then you got a big problem there with your theory of property rights that descends from that. And so the like where he goes on to make much, also really really good points, because if you're talking about the natural law, you have to refer back to the natural order. How are things supposed to work according to man's nature? And it's like we're social animals. It's like
Mhm.
we are not designed to be to do it all by ourselves. We're designed to live in a community and have division of labor, specialization, and basically sharing of responsibilities with each other, and not just sharing of mutual responsibilities that are
Right.
unchosen and that you did not choose. And so this is, you don't just have natural rights that flow from the natural law, the way it's properly conceived in the Catholic Church. You also have natural responsibilities that come with them, and by alienating these responsibilities, you alienate the rights that come with them. And like, you don't get just rights. These are not two separate things. One is causal of the other. Natural responsibilities are natural responsibilities cause natural rights to come into existence. And if you forsake your natural responsibilities, you lose your natural rights, or at least you lose the natural rights that correspond to those responsibilities.
Yeah. And Adam
Uh,
Smith agrees with that, ironically enough. I wanted to hit on one sentence that we kind of blew past, because I think
mhm.
it's useful to speak to the encompassing view that is oftentimes lost, like the encompassing view that you actually take with with a Catholic worldview, right? And it was this
Yeah,
sentence right here. Furthermore, can it be ignored that man has not been created for himself alone, but in order to be useful to his fellow creatures? So we
yeah,
notice that it's
uh,
not strictly talking about his usefulness to his fellow man, but usefulness to his fellow creatures, right? And the story of the
yep,
Garden of Eden, man is granted dominion over other animals in the world. And at least as far as I was taught, that
mhm.
translates to a stewardship that we have, because this world ultimately is not ours alone, right? It's
Yeah,
future humans, and it's ultimately God's. This is the doctrine that you'll be taught, and to where there actually is an obligation to treat other animals fairly, relatively speaking, right? Treating
yeah,
animals as they are. So we see here, we if we want to compare that. So I wrote, like, in the margin, like, compared to modern environmentalism, where that's very clearly obvious that what these people actually want to do is not, they view man as the problem, man is the scourge, that has no obligation to other creatures, which, by the way, in
yeah.
fact enables, the rapaciousness of certain people to engage in that kind of
It's
behavior.
true.
And then the other one I wrote down is the other thing I wrote down to compare it to is, modern derivations of Satanism, which purports precisely a radical egalitarianism, right?
Yeah,
You can think of the angsty teenage girl who says Satan doesn't discriminate against anybody. It's like, well, yeah, because he's taking your soul, so he'll just take what he get. He's just
he's robbing you blind. Of course,
yeah,
he doesn't discriminate.
yeah. Of course, he's gonna say whatever he wants. He's got his other hand in your back pocket, and he's taking your life savings.
Yeah, he's
But
taking you for a fool.
yeah. But there's this but again, to the point is this, what appears, uh, this past week especially, I don't know
Mhm.
exactly why, but I've just been hitting a lot again, on the idea of, like, the thoughts of a child versus the thoughts of a man or an adult,
Yeah,
and how that necessarily shifts your perspective, and what you again view might view as impositions as a child were actually for, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I can't believe I can't walk into this room, or I can't believe I can't touch the light socket or something like that. That's an imposition on my physical liberty, don't you see?
Mm-hmm.
And in the absurdity of what I'm talking about here, right, where obviously keeping a child away from an open electrical socket that's going to shock them potentially to death, or from a hot stove that can potentially burn and disfigure them, is actually quite precisely for the protection of children. And if you
Yeah.
extrapolate that beyond that to other social norms, mores that have the appearance, mind you, of being impositional, you actually see that what it does is create a higher order. And one of those, to bring it all together, is precisely this, I would argue, especially for men, but women too, is this adoption of responsibility before before rights. The idea of that, in fact, you actually have obligations to other people in your life, for better or worse, and sometimes that is for worse, going back to how some people don't have the proper upbringings, but you still have these obligations, if to other people. And the person who wants to believe that the world is that society is an imposition is precisely the person who will throw away these obligations,
Mhm.
because as they made an allusion to, because they have this incorrect archetype of man as a tiger stalking by themselves in nature, as opposed to a pack of wolves taking down the prey.
Yeah. I mean, it's these people who have, like, they haven't, seen the benefits. They've never, experienced the benefits of the natural order in their life. But, like maybe they grew up without a father. And, we all know that these statistics for like fatherless homes is like 5 times more likely to live in poverty, 9 times more likely to drop out of high school, 20 times more likely to be a criminal if you're a guy. Not so
Mhm.
much if you're a girl, but, there's other problems if you're a girl, like, sex work and stuff like that is highly predicted by not having a dad, or
Precisely.
not growing up with a dad. And
Well, and this connects to where
like,
we started too, right? At the
mhm,
macro level, like, let's just talking about like the temperature of the water, if you will, like
yeah,
at that macro of macro levels, to where we're born into this system at this particular point in time. We're literally the generation, millennials and Z,
yep,
who don't get to benefit,
yeah.
by and large, at a mass
American
at
dream
like a
died with us.
population level.
Yep. The American dream is that your kids will do better than you did. And that died with our generation. We are not going to do better than our parents did. That's pretty baked into the cake right now.
Yep.
And is what it is. But, it is our obligation to make sure that, our kids, the next generation that we give birth to, that they will do better than we did. And, it's like it was our great grandparents' generation, like the Great Depression, World War II generation. Like they were the last generation to, to kind of have like that, kind of have this, where they did not do better than their parents. And I think that, we will end up being quite a lot like them. But this thing right here where they, oh, so, I'm sorry, I just lost my point. Where was it? That, oh, I lost my point.
Well,
Sorry.
my diversion was on
Mhm.
the whole fellow creatures line, and that humans have an obligation under the natural order to fellow creatures. I don't know
Oh
if
yeah, that's right. Under the natural order, the people who don't see the benefit of it, to them it's all the same to them, because all they've ever seen is the bad. That's why they don't value it. That's why they don't treat it with respect. That's why they don't want to give honor to any sort of authority, because they've never had any authorities who are really all that worth honoring. You know what I mean? And
hmm
so they've never seen the value of it. See, like I grew up with a really good dad, not so great mom, but but they try, she tried, but anyway, but I had a really, really good father, and so who really, really compensated and really did a great job. And so like I've seen firsthand the benefit to having a really good dad, a real, a paternal figure really brings to, the order of a person. And and because of that, I've seen the value. I've experienced that firsthand. I have it on a, like, not just like up here, like as the way a lot of people just have it. They understand it up here, but they don't understand it right here. Like once
hmm
you understand it right here, you're just like, you're like, how could it be any other way? And but if you've never had that experience, you are going to be far less likely to value something that you've never experienced. And so when you have a society that has, like, again, that 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 low trust thing we started with, of cheap money, easy welfare, and easy sex, easy drugs, easy all these easy everything, that leads to a low trust society. Like, these are the sorts of things that, if this is all you've ever known, you're not going to value doing it the natural order way. And you're always going to be suspicious of people, and you're going to, ironically, be living miserable like Jean-Jacques Rousseau as an individual, because you can't trust anybody. I mean, it's the most isolating feeling out there, that you can't trust people and you have nobody to trust.
Was it Rousseau that abandoned his kids, or was that Descartes?
It's probably Descartes.
It's one of them. One of them, like, actually abandoned their children.
I could probably think it was Descartes, because I can't imagine Rousseau having kids.
Well, no, but that might have been. He might have had a couple of bastards. Anyway, I'm trying to remember. That's you're supposed to separate the person from the writings, but really, that's kind of dumb.
It doesn't work.
You really can't.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of refocus ourselves, we're talking about this liberty equality, right? That's the term, liberty-equality in the text. So from this liberty equality, supposedly native in the individual, will be derived, by virtue of the social contract, the principle of the sovereignty of the people. Sovereignty resides originally in the people, and not at all in God or in the natural authorities established by God. Pius VI does not fail to note this consequence. Pope Leo XIII, in his turn, condemns the liberal principle of equality of men, taken up again by the socialists, and carefully distinguishes the equality that men have from their common nature, from the inequality that they have from their diverse functions in society, and that is affirmed by the gospel. Quoting, "The socialists never cease, as we know, proclaiming that all men are by nature equal among themselves, and on this account they claim that no one owes to authority either honor or respect or obedience to the laws, except to those which they have sanctioned according to their caprice. On the contrary, according to the gospel documents, the equality of man rests in the fact that, all having the same nature, all people are called to the same most high dignity of sons of God, and at the same time, one soul and same end being proposed to all. Every person must be judged according to the same law and receive the penalties or reward depending on his merit. Nevertheless, there is an inequality of right and of power that emanates from the very author of nature, of whom all paternity in heaven and earth takes to his name." So what we see here very clearly, again, is this: we have a decent conception that we're all equal by this basic idea of our nature, and that this manifests in law. And what we see is this liberal impulse to take an idea and present it without limits bastardizes the actual concept of equality as it exists, because we're not equal because we're all the same. We're equal, or we're not equal because we're all exactly the same. That's a fallacy.
We're equal because we're not.
Yeah, that if you meet 20 people in your life, you understand that people aren't the same, right? Yeah. My understanding is any person who has more than one kid understands this lesson very easily too.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's very clearly not the case that we're all that, but we do share a common nature. And so under the Catholic teachings, that common nature is to discover God, find God, love God, serve God, ultimately as for being our creator.
And it is in this that man gets sovereignty. It's like the sovereignty is in the relationship you have to other people, not in, basically your ability to be unaggressed against, or to be hurt. So if you have a good relationship with people, you don't have to worry about them like coming after you. And if they're, and so you want to have a good relationship with the good people who have good relationships with God. It's that triune, that kind of triangle relationship is what sovereignty consists of. So it's whereas like libertarians and leftists, will both make the same error where they say that, You can't limit my physicality. This is what my sovereignty consists of. Is just my body. It's like, no, no. It's like, I totally can, and that's why that can't possibly be the basis of a definition for sovereignty. What it has to be is you're in a good and right relationship with other people, not just good as in you both feel good as in moral. You are both morally good and right. That's why I say right as in righteous. You are, in a right relationship with righteous people. Because if you're not in a right relationship with people who actually have righteousness, they're going to beat you to bloody pulp. They're going to go all Old Testament on you. And because that's what righteous people do. That's fortitude. That's the Catholic cardinal virtue of fortitude, courage, and it's not like I'm not a pacifist. I'm going to kick your ass if you come after me, or if you come after my loved ones who have their sovereignty progenerated from me and mine from them. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's again he calls out the socialists in particular in the idea that they reject authority.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to the
Very
point,
ironic.
some authorities might be worthy of skepticism, right? It's not to say you're following the right authority, but to then expand that to rejecting the concept of authority altogether is where you actually start to see the folly. Because invariably and inevitably, anybody who rejects authority is just trying to institute themselves. Is really just trying to institute themselves as the authority.
Basically,
whether it's somebody like me calling out the Sean Hannity of libertarian podcasting, or something like that. But
Mr. Homophobia is irrational and repugnant himself. Jesus, man,
he's a coward.
That was such a bad performance on his.
He's behalf. A coward.
Whatever. All right, let's move on. I'm not wasting any more seconds talking about him.
What did I finish? Pope Leo? Yes, I did. Leo XIII then recalls the precepts of obedience to authorities given by the Apostle St. Paul. Quote, "There is no power that does not come from God, and those that exist have been established by God. This is why he who resists authority resists the order willed by God." Then, the pontiff teaches that the hierarchy which is found in civil society is not a pure fruit of the will of men, but above all the application of the divine ordination, of the divine plan. For he who has created and who governs all things has disposed them in his provident wisdom in such a manner that the lower ones attain their end by the middle ones, and these by the higher ones. Likewise, therefore, he has willed that in the heavenly kingdom itself the choirs of angels be distinct and subordinated in the same way again, that he has established in the church different degrees of orders with the diversity of functions in such a way that not all be apostles, nor all doctors, nor all pastors. So has he established in civil society several orders different in dignity, in rights and in power, in order that the state, like the church, form one sole body composed of a great number of members, some more noble than others, but all of them necessary, the ones to the others, and solicitous of the common good.
One body, corporation, private statecraft. I have to keep making that point because, again, sovereignty is in that triune relationship of I have good people, that I'm in a right relationship with. The reason corporations work so dang well as mechanisms for human organization, for productive purposes and uniting incentives, is that it's that incentive structure that there are three groups in a corporation: the customers, the managers, and the shareholders. And each of them is incentivized to do more good to the others than they are to themselves, basically.
Well, and why isn't it two? Why isn't it two?
Why,
geometrically speaking, why isn't it just two?
Because it necessarily, in this Trinitarian relationship that we have, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, hey, you have, God, who's, God and God the Son, who are his, the Son is his perfectly actuated self. And, because it's more perfect to exist than not exist. And so you had so you have the will of God, which is God the Father himself, who who the Holy Spirit proceeds from, to the Son, and then and then through and back.
Yeah.
And so
well, geometrically speaking, if you have a single line, you can actually extrapolate a triangle from that. And if you or even if you have two lines, so if you have two parts of the relationship, the third one has to exist whether it's stated or not. So when you have management and when you have workers, it's actually baked into the cake whether you want to. I'm just trying to think if somebody wants to try and take this apart. Is no, like geometrically speaking, you actually do need the three components in order to have a complete picture of something.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not two-dimensional creatures; we're three-dimensional creatures. But actually, you can get that from the Trinity, by the way. That right. because if you have three eternal dimensions, they must, they in geometry, they must all intersect and have an eternal relationship with each other. And so this is how we know that the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. It works this way mathematically. This is how infinity works mathematically. And so if it works this way mathematically, why is it not going to work? Because let's think about, like, how can you have a third dimension that doesn't have an eternal relationship with one of the other dimensions? That makes zero sense geometrically. Yep. And so in order to get to three dimensions, you would have to go through a second dimension, which is, why, the creed, the original creed, like according to St. Athanasius, was that he was speaking in a different language. In Latin, it's more correct to say, he proceeds from the Father and the Son. Whereas, with Athanasius was, he proceeds from the Father through the Son. And which is a more like geometrically obvious what he's talking about. Because if you have three eternal beings, how can they not have how can one of them not have a relationship with the other two? They have to, all the, and so anyway, but talking about, like this idea of corporations, they mimic this image of Trinitarian love, because you have the will of the Father is what precedes the Holy Spirit, to the Son, who, basically, proceeds through him, basically, and through him and back. Anyway, so you have this. He is basically the fruit. He is the relation, that fruit of the will, of the goodwill between them. And this is why we say that love bears fruit. That I love my wife, and together we bear a son, based together. And so this idea that love, for it to be complete, is necessarily three. It's not two. It's necessarily three. So there always has to be that third person. That's why, where God says, hey, wherever two are, where Christ says, hey, wherever two or more are gathered, in my name, I am with them. What he's saying is, hey, I'm in that right relationship with them. So there's actually three in that relationship. This is why real love is necessarily three, not two. And so when you have a corporation that mimics that, where there's three groups, and they each have that ability, that desire to do more good to the other person than the other person does for them. That's what value exchange. It's literally a mimicry of Trinitarian love that we've managed to create. So when you have when you say one body, this is what the image of God looks like. This is why when God says, hey, let us make man in our own image, he's talking about this Trinitarian structure that we are supposed to have, this corporate structure, because it mimics the body, head, torso, legs, it's mimicking that body. So when you see organizations that do not have that corporate structure, by the way, the Catholic Church, first corporation in human history, and they were the first for like 1500. Yeah, a 1500-year head start on the second corporation in human history, which was also created by Catholics, uncoincidentally, and that's why the Catholic Church is the biggest organization in human history. It's the first corporation that had a really long head start on the second corporation. And when you look at like other like churches like Protestantism, where they've cut out this corporate structure because they reject authority, or our good friends in the Eastern Orthodox Church, where they haven't rejected authority, but they have so many of them that they don't actually have a functional head. There's many heads. There used to be one head. He was the Byzantine emperor. He was the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. But now, because they've divided themselves amongst many different nation states, with each state being the head of their own individual church, it's like, okay, now you have many heads, and you're only supposed to have one head. That's the corporate form, is that there's one head, and for the Catholic Church, that's the Pope. For a corporation, that's usually the CEO, and he's in charge.
Well, and moreover, I always like to make the point again of all the various religious orders within the Catholic order itself, which, like, to the outsider doesn't doesn't mean much, obviously, because they don't believe. But then also, it's also you don't quite get it until you understand that literally there are completely separatable hierarchies within the church. They just all ultimately report back to the Pope.
Except for the fucking Jesuits. We need to get rid of them.
Well,
we've disbanded the Jesuits.
They were the ones who were designed to respond directly to the Pope, but got a little bit too much latitude. But so let's I was going to use the monks as a better example, as a better example of this, which is to say, like, if you have a monastic community, they don't, while they will they're not actually under the hierarchy of the bishop in that area. So while they will talk to the diocese, and they'll of course defer to the bishop in certain respects, the bishop actually doesn't get to walk into a Benedictine monastery or a Franciscan monastery and say, here's how things are going to happen now, right? Technically speaking, the person who gets to do that is the person in the hierarchy, the head abbot of whatever particular order that is. And moreover, like with the Benedictines, which is one I know a lot about, you actually have two conferences of Benedictine monasteries that operate simultaneously in the United States. You have the Swiss American and you have the American Conference, and they actually have a different abbot at the head, who in turn swears allegiance to the Pope. But you actually have going to the corporate model, these wholly owned subsidiaries who have niched out, you might say, like niched out specialization that kind of just again happened naturally over time.
Yep. And with the that's one of the ways that we have that at that bottom level, they would be like the customer level on the on the corporate model. Same with like parishes and dioceses and all that, they would be at the customer at the more customer level. Whereas like when you have like the magisterium, you basically have the management with the Pope at the top. And for the shareholders, you have the College of Cardinals, basically. And where they are the electors of the next Pope. They are effectively the shareholders and the stewards. They're playing that shareholder role. And it's through sheer either luck or brilliance, we managed to build the first corporation by accident. It's like it's either an accident or it's like the guidance of the Holy Spirit. It really is.
Well, and to your point, and the point we're trying to draw here, and it's always it's again, as I've kind of like reflected on this series, as we're 6 chapters in particular, it's like the only people who are going to respond negatively to this kind of stuff are people who already have a predisposed negative action to religion or negative reaction to religion, and I can't help that. But like what we're also showing is, like you just said, like, okay, is it divine ordination? Is it an accident? To a certain extent, it's not who cares, but it is to say, look, the structure works, and it's
a fact of reality.
And it's scientific, if you will, because it's repeatable across multiple domains, either in such the domains like we talked about within Orthodoxy. I think a less successful way in most Protestantism.
With Orthodoxy, it's like their head is not part of the church. So it's like literally it's a body without a head. With his head, it's like the headless horseman. Basically, he's holding his head, and so that's why it doesn't fit the corporate model. It does they do have a head, it's just not attached to the body.
Yeah, they got a little too and then Protestantism is basically just somebody selling a franchise for $100 on the internet.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's a joke. There's no head, and there's probably not even a body. And it's really, if you want to look at the body of Protestantism as a whole, fracturing into, whether you're up to like 41,000, 45,000, something like that, different denominations. What if let's say that's all one body of Protestantism? What is it doing? It's decomposing. Yeah, literally.
And in some of the worst forms, you have the prosperity gospels and the televangelist types, right? Who take just manipulate, who are closer to manipulators than anything else.
Yeah, but it was nice to see that Kanye West spread the gospel to that pastor in Houston.
Oh yeah, I don't think I would actually. I don't know.
2020.
I tend to think Ye is rather. I think he's legitimately.
I do too.
I
It's
think
nice
he's a
to see
little
him
more
spreading the
connected.
gospel to what is that guy's name?
Are we talking about Joel Osteen?
Yeah, Joel Osteen.
Oh, I did. Is this a video? I haven't seen it. If it is,
No. Yeah, but when he went to when he was doing his gospel tour, he went to Joel Osteen's church, and
ah,
the joke was that Kanye West was spreading the gospel to Joel Osteen.
thank you. That's a good one.
That's 2020 for you,
Yep.
I think.
So wrapping up the chapter, then. It
Mhm.
appears to me that these texts clearly show the total unrealism of the fundamental principle of liberalism, liberty, equality. It is, on the contrary, an undeniable fact of nature that the individual at any stage of his life is precisely not an interchangeable individual, but he is a member, that is, at the outset, a part of a body set up without his having a word to say about it. Within this body, besides, he is subject to necessary and beneficial restraints. In this body, finally, he will discover the place that corresponds to his natural or acquired talents, as well as to his supernatural gifts. Being subject, there also to hierarchies and to inequalities that are still very beneficial. Thus has God devised it, a God of order and not of disorder.
So perfect, because order always has multiple points arranged, and and the one body that actually has real sovereignty is the community. That's where that's the sovereignty level. The individual cannot be sovereign. He has no ability to to manage his own lifestyle by himself. It's like, imagine someone who has to grow their own food, provide their own security, and make their own clothes, make their own housing and shelter, and everything else. It's like this person doesn't exist. They can't possibly exist. We have
Yeah,
to
that's
specialize
autarky.
these things out. Yeah, it doesn't work. It's, I mean, you're going to die. You're like, exile used to be a death sentence for exactly that reason. And that, because now you are the autarch and you have no ability to, it's like a slow and painful death as opposed to an immediate death. And this is such an important point, because it goes back to all of the other chapters that what he's been building up to, because there are these necessary inequalities that go with man cannot be, individuals cannot be sovereign. It is physically impossible for them to be sovereign. Thus they should not be treated like their own body is the source of their sovereignty. It is not. It is the source of their membership in the body that has sovereignty. That's where that's where sovereignty actually comes from, and it comes from being in a right relationship with your neighbors and God. That's why the first two commandments are love God to the max. Basically, yes, it's love God maximalism, and the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. This is what sovereignty consists of. This trifold relationship is the triune relationship is the three into one. It's the triune. As that, it is that relationship where sovereignty comes from. And this is why corporations are the sovereign order. This is where man is most sovereign. This is where he has the most protection, is in this corporate kind of order, like in the family, basically. And one kind of, as even with like Adam and Eve, one came from the other, and then the third came from the first two. This is, it mimics the relationship of the Trinity. Basically their son proceeded from the two of them, or was generated of the two of them. And the and we don't have to get into the sexual mechanics of it, but it works the same exact way. So even at that level, even at the biological physiological level, anyway. But but so we have that this mimicry that's of the Trinity. We are made in God's image. Our biology mimics this our creator, and our society is meant to be like a kind of, it's almost like a fractal relationship where it's supposed, our community is also supposed to mirror this sort of relationship, to where we have this mirror relationship with our community. Our community is supposed to be set up like a corporation, like the Catholic Church, and that's supposed to be the major part of it. And as we talked about last time with private statecraft, by properly properly forming the state in this corporate image, you get a properly incentivized state that wants to know everything it can. It wants to learn everything it can from the Catholic Church, because that's how it makes a profit. Because a profit has to be produced before it can be predated. So the not that the state is necessarily predatory, but in order for even for like a predatory state like what we have, profit still has to be produced first before they can take it from you. And so if you are a state that a natural order state that is designed to be to maximize production, to maximize its tax take, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to say, okay, well, if profit has to be produced, what is productive? That an action is productive means it is not sin, because sin has no existence. It cannot cause to exist what does not already exist. So therefore, you're going to have a state that is highly incentivized to be reducing the amount of sin in society, because those are necessarily opportunity costs to production. And I mean, and you see this like, hey, let's look at like, say, if you're a man, you abandoned your kids, and single parenthood. What does single parenthood do to production for the next generation? Not good. That kid's going to grow up with mental illness, and he's going to grow up to be like that shooter. How did that, you had 19 kids killed. That's 19 workers, 19 shareholders, 19 potential customers that all just died right there for no good reason. And all of their production, all of their consumption, all of that economic benefit, all of that profit, that to you as the state just got erased. And so, this has huge potential consequences to you that you want to avoid the sort of upbringing that Texas school shooter had, because this is a real threat to your profitability in the future. And you as a state of the natural order have a real incentive to, cut down on that, cut costs, so to speak. And so the the church has that unique ability to really tell people, this is an action that has existence, and this one is not. This one's love, that one's sin. And they're really, 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 really good at that. In fact, you could say they're designed by God to do that. And so, this is like your subject matter expert. If you're if you're a natural order state that has a for-profit incentive, the Catholic Church is like your subject matter expert on how to make a profit. It's like you want to learn everything you can from that one. So that's why, like, when you have I think he says it in here somewhere about the state and the church are supposed to be kind of one body like this. And this is how is that now you have if you have a properly ordered state, which is a
chapter.
It's a properly ordered community. Oh, it's the next chapter.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll get into that. But yeah, basically, when you have a properly configured state, this is the sort of thing that naturally leads to a properly a proper integralism. That the Catholic the Catholic social doctrine of the state's relationship to the church is called integralism. They're supposed to be one. And what we said is that that's not meaning theocracy. That means unity, united. Just like God. It's like the
because
Father.
We actually want the competing. We want the competing hierarchy.
Exactly.
You want people to have multiple recourses to avail themselves of.
Yep. And the it's that triple relationship of the church is not the state, and the people are not the state, and it's it's that triple relationship right there, that the people kind of are the church, but they're not the entirety of it. They're the we say we're the body of Christ, but there's also monks, there's also the shareholders, the cardinals, the Pope, who are like not really the people. As we say, but because there's that triple relationship between them now, you have a properly ordered system. This is what the image of God is, the natural order. And you can always tell when a organization is malformed, because it will not have that imago Dei in its form. And you can, and this is why, like, when the the Orthodox are trying to question me, I'm trying to explain to them, you can't do it in 280 characters, but the or like the Protestants too, hey, it is that imago Dei. That's the image of God. Man is made in that image. That's the blueprint. That's what we're supposed to be mimicking. And it's not a unitary God that we believe in. It's a Trinitarian God that we believe in. And because of this, this is what we need to be mimicking at every single fractal level of society. And if we're not, there's a problem. That is like, you can immediately look at the form and tell that its function is bad. And you can immediately look at the the kid who was raised by a single mother and say, the form is bad. That's not quite right. There's going to be a problem there. There just is. And it's not fair.
Well,
but it's
and
true.
mind you, you're also talking, so you're talking about at the, if you will, at the philosophical level, like the imposition of certain incentive frames. What we experience, going back to where we started, as I'm so fond of doing, where we start an episode, talking about how it's like, we just find ourselves at this point in history, so to speak. We're it's not exactly our fault that we're so rich and, generally speaking, well off. Is precisely this, is that in the democratic incentive framework, you actually have that malformation, which rewards, precisely rewards a social system that we know has deleterious effects on people. Now, here's what happens, right? When you say something like this, is immediately somebody will say, well, my mother was a single mother, right? Or, you look to, well, LeBron James was raised by a single mother. It's like, yeah, for exceptional people will still tend to do exceptional things.
Yeah.
Right. And
they're exceptions for a reason.
Right. And exceptional, but for every LeBron James, there's another, there's 5 kids who don't finish high school. Right.
There's a good 10,000 for every LeBron. There's 10,000 that are that do so much worse. I mean, and then again, for every one LeBron, there's also the the Texas shooter who was raised by his grandma, and what do you do? And and look at all of the school shooters. They all have parental pretty much all of them have parental problems.
Well, what did somebody like LeBron have? He had good coaches, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I don't know a lot about LeBron particularly, right?
Huh? Yeah. He had to have had good coaches,
right? But he had coaches. He went to a Catholic high school, so he had that he had that structure around it. So where even to the extent, because there in the Bible you read about widows all the time, right? Because because people would just die. So of course today we actually create the problem as a matter of policy vis-a-vis like single parenthood. Yeah. But so we actually see that's again where like the church in its charitable nature is supposed to step in and attempt to fill that function to the extent that it can, is to fill that role of the missing figure. Right.
And to the extent that you don't, is to the extent that the people are kind of forced to rule themselves, which is what they really cannot do. And this is where you get strength of the people, which is what the literal translation of democracy. Demos is like village or people, and Kratos is strength or power. So when you're saying power to the people, that's literally like a literal translation of democracy. But that is juxtaposed to monarchy, rule of one. Strength of the people versus rule of one. In other words, you have a people who are trying to rule that, basically they're ruling themselves by their own strength.
Well, it's ruled by many, which incidentally enough kind of,
well, it's not rule at all. That's the point.
Well, no. I would beg to differ. I think there is a rule in the rule by many. It's just not a coherent rule. So think of the way herd animals operate. So like the herd animals actually operate with intelligence distributed throughout the herd. There's not one individual member that actually makes a decision. There's maybe a few key people at different points in time, but really, if you're in a stampede, if you're just running, as the animals are running, they're reacting in real time, and it's just the minute changes of each individual wildebeest, let's say, is what I'm thinking of in particular, that actually like leads them on their migratory journey. And the same thing with birds, right? There is no, as far as I understand it, they haven't been able to map out like why birds will do like the crazy patterns and stuff that we see them do and like fish as they like move and
When
bob
they're
and weave.
flying, you mean?
Huh?
When they're flying, I know that's an aerodynamic thing. That's it makes it easier to spread the wind out and to stay aloft. And as to why they're going in a particular direction, they have magnetosenses in their eyes where
No,
they
no,
can.
no. Like, like when the
Mhm.
way the way they swarm. Like, there's no way of predicting exactly how like birds swarm, is my understanding.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
like if you watch a flock
Yeah, I
of
don't know
birds,
that.
like not necessarily like geese flying in a V, but like if you watch a
Mhm.
smaller flock of birds, as they kind of like will go
I was
up.
thinking geese flying in a V. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, I meant more like larger flocks, but it to the like they'll put on like dazzling
Mhm.
displays for nobody in some part in like rainforests, and like biologists aren't exactly sure why. So to the point, there is a rule there, but it's a very fractured rule
Mhm.
that doesn't actually lead to cohesion, right? It's just it operates at
Yeah.
I would maybe say at the level of instinct. It's not a
Animal
completed
instinct. Yeah.
yeah, it's not a completed sense of it, which is why
Not a complete
it's
human.
so
Yeah.
ripe to be taken over.
Yeah. It's not a full human. It lacks the human form. Basically, like it
Mhm.
lacks that corporate form.
Yeah.
All right. Final thoughts.
No, that was kind of it. This is an interesting chapter. I thought in particular,
Mhm.
I thought in particular this chapter really does a good job of showing if you already have an anti-democratic bent
Mhm.
or an anti-egalitarian bent. I think it shows how you can still harmonize the better aspects of understanding, like of us being brothers in Christ, for to use a
There is.
common parlance.
Yeah. Equality is a poor man's unity.
Hmm.
Basically, I mean, it's a bastard of unity.
Well,
We're supposed to be united, not equal.
like it's kind of cool, but like a band, like a drum line. A drum line doesn't even include one kind of drum, right? You generally have like a bass drum. I'm a
Mhm.
drummer. This is why you
Yeah.
have a bass drum, your snare drums, you have your quads or your quints, and you have your cymbals. And each person is actually each person is equal in that they're all part of the drum line, but they're unequal in what they actually are doing as part of
Mhm.
that drum line. And regard and yeah, so
Yeah.
that's an example right there of what we're talking about, and how you can understand it is there's a quality of a kind, but it's not but maximizing that principle across all aspects of our life is again where we find the faults and we see the degradation of the social system vis-a-vis liberalism.
Yeah. I mean, Satan, the father of lies, he always tries to be like an imposter or to like fabricate his own like thing that's closely based to the true thing. And equality is his bastardization of unity in the same way that his version of liberty, which is like, freedom of the physicality, is the or like really freedom from all constraint, is a bastardization of the real liberty, which is like the freedom to choose the good. I can only imagine what we're going to do when we get to fraternity. Like the French Revolution, that's fraternity. Gosh, reign of terror. If this is how they treat their brothers, can't imagine how they treat their enemies.
Yeah.
And so, all right, but we're going to get there soon enough. All right, plugs.
If you guys liked some of the insights that I've had, do me a favor, go over to beenawake.com, subscribe with your email address. That way we stay in touch. Plenty of good things coming there. You can follow me on all social media at the LB Muniz.
Thanks, guys. Take care.